I spoke a short while ago to Sky News US correspondent Annelise Nielsen and asked, Joe Biden's own global warming plans, what is the president going to this Glasgow conference with? A net zero promise, like us?
Well, at this point, it seems pretty impossible that he could get there, and that's because the devil is always in the detail. Now, these negotiations are still ongoing. They're hoping by Wednesday US time, before he jets off for G20, that they'll have some kind of deal. But it all comes down to this one senator. Everything by the Democrats has been lumped into these two major pieces of legislation. Now, one's the $1 trillion infrastructure package that they had to take all of that progressive policy out of to get the Republicans in the Senate to agree to. What they've done is taken all of those kind of tricky topics and put them in this social policy package. Then you look at the actual Clean Energy Performance Program. It's a $150 billion program. It's two-tiered. So the way that they want to do it, they want to incentivize clean energy and they want to punish those utility companies that aren't transitioning to what they consider clean energy: wind, solar, nuclear. Those penalties: methane fee on leaks from oil and gas wells, a carbon tax, and closing fossil fuel subsidies. Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia won't, at this point, accept any of those. So that whole $150 billion package off the table. What they're really grasping for now is trying to put in subsidies where else they can, $300 billion in tax credits for wind and solar energy, and really small fry stuff for what we're looking at in the size of America: $13.5 billion for electric car charging stations, $9 billion to upgrade the electric grid to support those car charging stations, and $17.5 billion to reduce carbon dioxide emissions from federal buildings and cars. So at this point, their best case scenario is they're not going to get to a point where they can achieve that at all.
That means also that we're looking, if that happens, we're looking at the Glasgow Climate Summit on the weekend, starting with China, the world's biggest emitter, not going and increasing its emissions. The US, which is going, not able to commit to net zero, the second biggest emitter, and it's tiny Australia, just 1% of the world's emissions, going there with a big zero emissions target that it can't even figure out how it's actually going to achieve. The whole thing looks quite farcical. By the way, Annelise, is there any concern in the US that these global warming schemes, on the whole, tend to make the US weaker and China stronger in relative terms?
Well, there has been discussion around some of the technology. There was a pretty significant piece of legislation around solar panels in the US and trying to avoid any Chinese funding there. But even that's stalled because the Democrats have been so focused on getting this other legislation through the reconciliation process. Polling consistently shows more people disapprove of his performance than approve. If they lose this Virginia governor's race, he's really has a hard case saying that he's got a mandate to do any of this stuff, because there's clearly dissatisfaction among the population if that comes to pass. So it could still happen, but the branding will be there. The substance of it won't.
You mentioned the declining polls of Joe Biden. They're really quite extraordinary. Terrible disapproval ratings. Part of that seems to me a lack of confidence in whether he's mentally all there. And I just wonder, Annelise, we've discussed this before, but Joe Biden's body language in the CNN town hall the other day raises, well, I think, even more questions about his mental health. For a while, he stood there staring at his shoes. During another question, he stood with hands clenched as if holding the reins of an invisible horse.
You had told us at a town hall, I think it was in July, that this was just near-term inflation. The Wall Street Journal recently talked to like 67 financial experts who said that they saw high inflation going all the way or deep into 2022.
Annelise, did that footage raise more concerns in public debate about the president's mental decline?
Yeah, look, this has become more of a mainstream topic of discussion. And when we look at the consistent coverage we've seen of him and the very limited access that the media gets to the president, he doesn't do a lot of events where they can ask questions of him. So a forum like this town hall has been really significant because it shows him for an extended period of time. And that's fairly consistent behaviour from what we've seen in a number of press conferences. But there are serious concerns from people about how he's conducting himself on the world stage. Again, the Australians who were here were raving about just how sharp and on top of everything he was. That could be true. It seems very unlikely, and it seems like it's more his team that's taking the lead on so many of these significant issues, and that's why we see a lot of these really strong policies coming through, in particular on climate change.
Yeah, and the White House even having to clean up his unguarded comments on Taiwan, which he said, we will defend them if there's a war against China, when in fact the real policy is, well, it's ambiguous, but he was very hard and fast, and the White House backpedaled. I mean, the whole thing looks from the outside a bit of a mess. Annelise Nielsen, thank you so much for joining